Some people hide their deepest pain behind the quietest apologies. And on a cold November night in Chicago, a powerful man was about to discover exactly what that meant. The sound of breaking porcelain echoed through the mansion like a gunshot. Olivia Carter froze. The antique vase lay shattered across the marble floor, delicate blue pieces scattered around her feet like fallen petals. For one terrible second, she couldn't breathe. Then she dropped to her knees. "I'll clean it up. Please don't be mad," she whispered, her voice so soft it almost disappeared into the silence. Her hands moved quickly, gathering the broken pieces one by one. That was when a study door opened. Ethan Park stopped in the doorway. At 38 years old, he had built an empire that made grown men tremble at the sound of his name. He was known for his discipline, his silence, and the cold control that never seemed to leave his face. Yet now he simply stood there, one hand still on the doorknob, staring at the young housekeeper kneeling on the floor. Not at the broken vase, not at the mess, at her hands. They were covered in bruises. Faint shades of purple and yellow marked her fingers and wrists, old injuries mixed with newer ones. Even in the warm light from the chandelier, they looked painfully out of place against her dark green uniform. Olivia didn't notice him at first. She was too busy trying to gather every tiny piece of porcelain, as if putting the vase back together might somehow fix everything else in her life. A sharp edge caught her fingertip. She flinched and pulled her hand back immediately. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, still not looking up. "I know this vase was expensive. I'll work extra hours. I'll pay for it somehow." Ethan said nothing. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, he found himself unable to move. There was something unsettling about the scene before him. The young woman had only been working in his house for 6 months. She arrived before sunrise, left long after dark, and never asked for anything. She never complained when others forgot her name. She never took breaks. She never even looked directly at him. Yet every few days he noticed something new. A small bruise, a bandage, a sleeve pulled lower than usual. And every time anyone asked, she gave the same answer. "I bumped into something." Slowly, Ethan stepped closer. The marble floor was cold beneath Olivia's knees. She finally sensed someone standing beside her and looked up. The color drained from her face. "Mr. Park," she breathed. Her eyes widened with fear, not because he looked angry, but because she looked as though she expected anger from everyone. Ethan glanced down at the broken vase and then back at her hands. His jaw tightened. "Olivia," he said quietly. She swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." He stared at the bruises for another long moment. Then, for reasons he didn't yet understand, one question rose above all the others. "Who did this to your hands?" Olivia's fingers tightened around the broken piece of porcelain. For a moment, she looked as though she had forgotten how to breathe. Then she lowered her eyes and gave the same small smile she always wore, the one that never quite reached her eyes. "Nobody, sir," she said softly. "I'm just clumsy." Ethan did not answer. The lie hung in the air between them. He had heard those words before. 3 weeks ago, when she showed up with a bandage wrapped around her thumb. 2 months ago, when she limped slightly while carrying laundry baskets down the hall. Every time someone noticed, she smiled and said she was clumsy. Olivia carefully placed another broken piece onto the silver tray beside her. "I really am sorry about the vase," she whispered. "Mrs. Brooks said it came from Korea and that it is very old." "Forget the vase," Ethan said quietly. She looked up in surprise. Most people would have been worried about the expensive antique lying in pieces on the floor. Instead, this powerful man seemed to care about something else entirely. "Are you hurt?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. She blinked once and then quickly shook her head. "No, sir." But she looked tired, more tired than someone her age should ever look. At 26, Olivia Carter carried herself like a woman who had already lived several lifetimes. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes and a kind of sadness that seemed permanently stitched into her expression. Ethan noticed details he had ignored before. Her uniform sleeves were slightly too long, almost as if she deliberately chose them that way. The soles of her shoes were worn. Her hands, despite the bruises, were rough from work. She worked more than anyone in the house. She arrived every morning before 6 o'clock. By the time the kitchen staff came in, breakfast trays were already prepared, and every room on the first floor smelled faintly of lemon polish. At night, long after everyone else had gone home, Ethan would sometimes pass through the hall and see light under the laundry room door. Olivia was always there, folding towels or ironing shirts. "Do you ever rest?" he asked suddenly. She seemed surprised by the question. "I rest enough." That is not an answer. A small laugh escaped her, so quiet he almost missed it. "I suppose I have never been very good at resting." Ethan stared at her. Most people became nervous around him. Some were afraid. Others tried too hard to impress him. But Olivia was different. She seemed more frightened of disappointing people than of them. Slowly, she rose to her feet, clutching the tray of broken porcelain. "I will clean this up," she said. "Then I can start preparing tomorrow's breakfast." It was almost 10 o'clock at night. Ethan glanced at the clock on the wall and frowned. Tomorrow's breakfast can wait. She looked genuinely confused by the idea. "I still have a few things to finish." Before he could answer, her phone vibrated inside her pocket. The color immediately left her face. She did not look at the screen right away. Instead, she stared at it as though she already knew what it would say. Then, very slowly, she silenced the call and slipped the phone back in her pocket. Ethan noticed that her hands were shaking. The phone remained silent after that single vibration, but something had changed in the room. Olivia's face had gone pale, and the tray in her hands trembled so slightly that most people would never have noticed. Ethan did. "You should answer it," he said. "It is probably nothing." She spoke too quickly. Then she forced a small smile onto her face. "Just a wrong number." Ethan looked at her for another long moment. Wrong numbers did not make people look frightened. Wrong numbers did not make someone's hands shake. Before he could say anything else, Mrs. Helen Brooks appeared in the doorway. The head housekeeper stopped when she saw the broken vase. "Oh dear," she sighed. "What happened?" Olivia immediately lowered her head. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Brooks. I lost my grip." To her surprise, the older woman did not scold her. Instead, she looked at Ethan, then back at Olivia. "It is only a vase, child." Olivia seemed almost confused by the kindness. Mrs. Brooks stepped forward and gently took the tray from her hands. "You have worked enough for one day. I still need to finish the linens upstairs." "No, you do not." The older woman smiled softly. "I can handle the rest." Olivia opened her mouth as if she wanted to argue, then quietly nodded. Ethan watched the exchange in silence. It was strange. The young woman behaved as though resting was something she had not earned. Mrs. Brooks finally looked at him. "I've been telling her for months to slow down, Mr. Park. She never listens." "I am fine," Olivia said quickly. "You said that when you nearly fainted in the laundry room last month." Olivia's eyes widened. "Mrs. Brooks," the older woman sighed. "You work too hard, sweetheart." Ethan turned toward Olivia. "You fainted." She looked at the floor. "I skipped lunch that day. That is all." "And breakfast," Mrs. Brooks added gently. "And dinner the night before." The room became quiet. Ethan felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. He had known people who chase success until exhaustion, but this was different. This looked like someone carrying a burden they could not put down. "Why?" he asked. Olivia looked up. "Why what? Why do you work every hour you can?" She seemed startled by the question. Then she gave the same answer she always gave. "I like being useful." Even Mrs. Brooks did not believe that. The older woman looked at Ethan and lowered her voice. "She asked for extra shifts every week. She takes every job nobody else wants. Sometimes I think she would sleep in the laundry room if I allowed it." Olivia looked embarrassed. "I just do not like wasting time." At that exact moment, her phone vibrated again. Once, then again, then a third time. The screen briefly lit up inside her pocket. Ethan could not see the message, but he saw her expression. Fear. Real fear. Olivia quickly turned off the phone completely. "I should go finish cleaning the guest rooms," she whispered. "There are no guests tonight," Ethan said quietly. She froze. For the first time since he had known her, she had no answer. Olivia finally lifted her eyes, and for the first time that evening, Ethan saw something deeper than exhaustion. It was panic. The kind that lived quietly inside a person and only surfaced when there was nowhere left to hide. "I should get back to work," she said softly. "There is always something to do." She turned toward the hallway, but Mrs. Brooks gently touched her arm. "Sweetheart, go get some rest." Olivia nodded once and disappeared up the staircase. Her footsteps so light they almost sounded apologetic. The room remained silent long after she was gone. Mrs. Brooks bent down and carefully gathered the last pieces of the shattered vase. "She's a good girl," she said quietly. Ethan remained standing near the fireplace. "Who is she?" The older woman looked surprised. "You know her name?" "That is not what I asked." Mrs. Brooks sighed. "I do not know much. She does not talk about herself." She placed another piece of porcelain onto the tray. "She arrived 6 months ago, carrying one suitcase and wearing a coat that was much too thin for winter. She said she needed work and that she could do anything." Ethan listened without speaking. "I almost did not hire her," Mrs. Brooks admitted. "She looked exhausted. I thought she might quit after a week." A small smile crossed her face. "Instead, she became the hardest worker in this house." "Does she have family?" The older woman hesitated. "I asked once." Ethan waited. "She said there was a little boy who needed her." The words settled heavily in the room. "A son?" he asked. "I do not know." Mrs. Brooks shook her head. She never explained. She carried the tray to the table and returned. "Sometimes I find her sitting alone in the kitchen after everyone has gone home. She keeps a photograph inside her apron pocket." "A photograph?" "A little boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old." Ethan frowned slightly. In 6 months, he had learned almost nothing about the woman who worked under his roof. He knew what time she arrived each morning. He knew she preferred tea over coffee because she always made herself a cup before sunrise. He knew she hummed softly while folding laundry. Yet he knew nothing that truly mattered. "She asked for advances on her salary," Mrs. Brooks said quietly. Ethan looked up. "How often?" "Almost every month." "For what reason?" The older woman shook her head again. "She never says." She paused for a long moment. "But every time she asks, she looks terrified that I might refuse." The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10 times. Outside, snow had begun to fall, tiny white flakes drifting past the tall windows. "I think she carries the weight of the world on those small shoulders," Mrs. Brooks whispered. Ethan glanced toward the staircase. "Then why does she never ask for help?" The older woman gave him a sad smile. "Some people have lived alone for so long that they forget help exists." The words lingered in the silence. Just then, something caught Ethan's eye near the fireplace. A white envelope lay on the floor where Olivia had been kneeling. It must have slipped from her apron pocket. He picked it up. The envelope was worn at the corners, as though it had been opened many times. There was no name on the front. Only 3 words written in careful handwriting. "For Noah's treatment." Ethan stared at the envelope, and for the first time that night, he felt a question begin to grow inside him. Who was Noah? And why did a young woman with bruised hands seem willing to carry so much pain for him? The envelope felt strangely heavy in Ethan's hand. He looked at the neat handwriting again. "For Noah's treatment." There was something heartbreaking about those 3 words. They were simple, almost ordinary, and yet they explained so much. The extra shifts, the sleepless eyes, the bruised hands. Mrs. Brooks stepped closer. "I have never seen that before," she said softly. Ethan carefully opened the envelope. Inside were several folded receipts and a photograph. He pulled the picture out first. A little boy smiled back at him. He could not have been older than 8. He had dark curly hair and bright eyes, but his face was pale, and he sat in what looked like a hospital room. On the back of the photograph, written in the same careful handwriting, were the words, "Keep fighting, little brother." Ethan stared at the sentence. Little brother. Not her son, her brother. He unfolded the papers next. They were hospital statements, appointment schedules, pharmacy receipts. Every page carried the same name, Noah Carter. There was also a bill that had been stamped past due. The amount made him pause. It was more money than Olivia would earn in an entire year. "Dear Lord," Mrs. Brooks whispered beside him. Ethan said nothing. He simply kept reading. Then he noticed something else. The dates on the receipts stretched back nearly 2 years. This was not a recent struggle. This had been her life for a long time. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked softly. Olivia was still awake. Ethan carefully placed everything back into the envelope. "I will return this to her tomorrow," he said. But he did not move. A few minutes later, he walked into his study and placed the envelope on his desk. The snow outside had become heavier, covering the garden in white. He sat down, but found himself unable to focus on the business reports waiting for him. Instead, he kept seeing a young woman kneeling on a marble floor, apologizing for a broken vase while hiding bruises on her hands. Near midnight, he stood and walked toward the kitchen. The mansion was quiet. Most of the staff had gone home hours ago. As he passed the back hallway, he noticed a faint light coming from the laundry room. He stopped. The door was slightly open. Inside, Olivia sat alone on a wooden chair. She had changed into an old gray sweater and was holding her phone with both hands. She looked smaller somehow, as though the night had finally worn her down. Ethan was about to leave when he heard her voice. "I know, doctor. I understand." Silence. Then she spoke again, barely above a whisper. "Please give me a little more time." Her voice trembled. "I have almost enough money." Another pause. Ethan could hear only the soft hum of the washing machines. Then Olivia lowered her head. "No, do not tell him." She swallowed hard. "Noah already worries too much." She closed her eyes. "Please, just one more week." The silence that followed seemed endless. Then she whispered something that made Ethan's chest tighten. "I promised my mother I would take care of him." A single tear slipped down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, as though even crying was a luxury she could not afford. For the first time in many years, Ethan Park felt completely helpless standing outside a laundry room door. The next morning, snow still covered the city when Olivia quietly left the mansion before sunrise. She thought everyone was asleep. She did not know that Ethan Park had been standing by a study window, watching her pull her coat tighter against the cold. There was something different about her this morning. She looked exhausted, as though she had not slept at all. A few seconds later, she disappeared through the front gate. Ethan glanced at the clock. It was 5:30 in the morning. Her shift did not start for another hour. Without fully understanding why, he grabbed his coat and followed. Chicago was still dark, the streets nearly empty except for a few delivery trucks and the occasional taxi. Olivia walked 3 blocks before boarding a city bus. 20 minutes later, she stepped off near the Children's Medical Center. Ethan remained inside his car across the street and watched her hurry toward the entrance. A hospital. Suddenly, the envelope on his desk made perfect sense. He parked and entered the building a few minutes later. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Families sat in waiting areas wrapped in blankets, and nurses moved quietly through the hallways. Then he saw her. Olivia stood outside a room on the 3rd floor. Through the glass window, Ethan could see the little boy from the photograph. Noah looked even smaller in person. Tubes and monitors surrounded his bed, but when he saw Olivia, his entire face lit up. She walked inside and immediately smiled, a real smile this time. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she said softly. "You are early," Noah replied. "I wanted to bring you breakfast." She held up a small paper bag. "Your favorite blueberry muffins." The boy grinned. Ethan stayed in the hallway, unseen. "Did you work all night again?" Noah asked. Olivia sat beside him and brushed a curl away from his forehead. "I had a few extra things to do." The boy frowned. "You look tired." She laughed gently. "I always look tired before coffee." Noah was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question Ethan would never forget. "Did the hospital call you again?" Olivia's smile faded for only a second. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you get this worried look every time they do." The little boy looked down at his blanket. "I heard the nurse talking yesterday. I know treatment costs money." Olivia's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away before he could see. "Hey," she gently touched his hand. "You do not need to worry about grown-up things." "I do, because you worry about them." Silence settled between them. Then Noah whispered, "I'm sorry I'm so expensive." The word struck Ethan like a physical blow. Olivia's face crumpled. She immediately pulled her brother into her arms. "No," she whispered fiercely. "Never say that. You hear me? Never." She held him for a long moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. The boy's small arms wrapped around her. But your hands keep getting hurt because of me. Ethan looked down at her bruised fingers and finally understood. There was no secret enemy. No hidden cruelty. The young woman with the tired eyes had simply been working herself beyond exhaustion, taking every extra job she could find, carrying every burden alone, all to keep one little boy smiling. For a long time, Ethan did not move. He simply stood in the hallway, staring through the small window in the hospital room. He had spent his entire adult life surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Money, power, influence, loyalty bought with favors and fear. But this young woman asked for nothing. She worked until her hands were bruised and her body was exhausted, and she still apologized for taking up space in the world. Inside the room, Noah smiled as Olivia handed him a blueberry muffin. She tore a napkin in half and carefully wiped crumbs from his chin. The gesture was so simple, so ordinary, and yet something deep inside Ethan shifted. It reminded him of another time, another life. He suddenly remembered his own mother sitting beside his bed when he was 8 years old, brushing his hair back after a fever and telling him that people who loved you stayed, even when life became difficult. She had been gone for nearly 20 years. He had not thought about that memory in a very long time. A nurse walked into the room, carrying a chart. Olivia immediately stood. "Any news?" she asked softly. The nurse's expression became gentle. "The doctor would like to begin the next treatment cycle soon." Olivia nodded. "I understand, but we still need to resolve the balance on the account first." The words were quiet, but Ethan heard every one of them. Olivia lowered her eyes. "I know. We have been extending the deadline because Noah is such a wonderful little patient." The nurse placed a hand on her arm. "I just do not want you carrying this alone." Olivia managed a smile. "I will figure it out." "You always say that." "Because I always do." The nurse looked as though she wanted to say more, but instead she simply nodded and left. Noah watched his sister carefully. "Did I make things harder again?" Olivia immediately shook her head. "No, sweetheart. You make everything better." "Then why do you look sad?" She sat beside him and took his hand. "Sometimes grown-ups get tired. That is all. I wish I could help you." Olivia smiled, but her eyes glistened. "You already do." "Ow!" She touched his cheek. "By being here." The little boy smiled and leaned against her shoulder. Ethan looked away for a moment. Something tightened painfully in his chest. In all his years of building an empire, no business victory had ever felt as meaningful as this small hospital room filled with quiet love and impossible burdens. He finally understood why her hands were bruised. They were the hands of someone carrying too much and never putting anything down. Then he saw Olivia pull a folded piece of paper from her pocket. It was a list. She looked at it quickly before tucking away again. Ethan caught only a few words. Evening shift, warehouse, cleaning service, grocery delivery. 4 jobs. She was working 4 jobs. For one little boy who apologized for being expensive. Ethan slowly closed his eyes. When he opened them again, his expression had changed. For the first time in years, the powerful man everyone feared did not feel strong. He felt something else entirely. Helpless. And standing in that quiet hospital hallway, Ethan Park made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Olivia stayed at the hospital until nearly noon. She helped Noah finish his breakfast, read him 2 chapters from his favorite adventure book, and promised she would return after work. When she finally stepped into the hallway, she nearly jumped. Ethan Park was standing there. For a second, she looked as though she had seen a ghost. "Mr. Park?" she whispered. "What are you doing here?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I could ask you the same thing." Color drained from her face. She glanced toward Noah's room and then back at him. "I can explain." "You do not have to." The words surprised her. She tightened her grip on her purse. "I should have told Mrs. Brooks I needed the morning off." "I am sorry." There was again another apology. Ethan wondered if she apologized when it rained or when the wind blew too hard. "You apologize too much," he said quietly. She blinked. "Ido." "Yes." A small, confused smile touched her lips. "I suppose I never noticed." Silence settled between them. Then Ethan held out the white envelope. Her eyes widened. You found it. You dropped it last night. She took the envelope carefully, as though it contained something fragile. Thank you. Why did you never tell anyone? He asked. Olivia looked down at the photograph, still sticking out from the envelope. Because it is my responsibility. That little boy is your brother. She nodded. Our mother passed away 2 years ago. Her voice softened. I promised her I would take care of him. And so you work for Jobs? She looked up in surprise. She realized then that he knew everything. Her cheeks turned pink with embarrassment. I'm trying my best. At the cost of your own health. No one needs me. She said it so simply that it sounded like the most obvious thing in the world. Ethan had no answer to that. They stood in silence until a doctor stepped out of a nearby office. Miss Carter, he said kindly. I was hoping to speak with you. Olivia immediately looked nervous. Is something wrong? No, not at all. The doctor smiled. Actually, I have good news. She stared at him. The entire balance on Noah's account has been paid. The hallway became completely still. Olivia blinked once, then twice. I am sorry, she said softly. I think you have the wrong patient. No. The doctor checked his clipboard. Noah Carter. The account was cleared this morning, including future treatment costs. She looked utterly confused. But I did not pay anything. An anonymous donor requested complete privacy. The doctor smiled warmly. Whoever it was, they wanted your brother to receive every treatment he needs. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. She looked from the doctor to Ethan and then back again. Are you sure? Quite sure. The doctor gently touched her shoulder. Your brother can focus on getting better now. He walked away, leaving silence behind him. Olivia stood frozen. Then, very slowly, she turned toward Ethan. Did you know about this? She asked. He held her gaze. For the first time since they met, she looked directly into his eyes. There was hope there, and fear, and a kind of disbelief that made his chest ache. Ethan did not answer right away. Finally, he spoke. No child should ever have to apologize for needing help. A tear slipped down her cheek. Then another. And for the first time in a very long time, Olivia Carter allowed herself to cry. 3 months later, spring arrived in Chicago. The snow had melted, the trees outside the mansion had turned green again, and sunlight spilled through the tall windows that had once reflected only winter skies. In a hospital room on the 3rd floor of the Children's Medical Center, Noah Carter sat on the edge of his bed wearing a bright blue sweater and a grin so wide it seemed to light up the room. Do I really get to go home today? He asked for the 5th time that morning. Olivia laughed softly as she folded his blanket into a neat square. You have asked me that all day, because I still cannot believe it. A nurse walked in carrying discharge papers and smiled. You are officially free, young man. Noah pumped his fist into the air. Olivia covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes again. They were different tears this time. Lighter ones. Happy ones. A few minutes later, there was a gentle knock on the door. Ethan Park stepped inside, carrying a small paper bag. Noah's face immediately brightened. Mr. Park, during the past 3 months, the powerful businessman had become a familiar visitor. Sometimes he brought books, sometimes puzzles. Once he brought a telescope because Noah wanted to see the stars from his hospital window. Ethan handed him the bag. I heard someone is going home today. Noah opened it and gasped. Inside was a model airplane kit. This is awesome. Ethan smiled. I thought you could build it at home. Olivia watched the exchange quietly. There was still something she had never fully understood. Why a man who could buy almost anything in the world had chosen to care so deeply about 2 people who had once been strangers. As if reading her thoughts, Ethan looked at her. How are your hands? She glanced down. The bruises were gone now. Weeks of proper rest had finally allowed them to heal. She smiled softly. Better. Good. Noah looked between them and grinned. You know, I think you worry about my sister almost as much as I do. Olivia laughed in embarrassment, while Ethan looked genuinely caught off guard. The little boy seemed very pleased with himself. Later that afternoon, they stepped outside the hospital together. Warm sunlight touched their faces. Noah lifted his arms toward the sky as though he had been set free. Olivia closed her eyes for a moment and simply breathed. She had spent so long surviving that she had forgotten what peace felt like. Thank you. she said quietly. Ethan looked at her. For what? For giving my brother a future. He was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out and gently took her hands in his. She looked surprised. These were not the hands he had first seen on a marble floor months ago. They no longer trembled. They no longer carried fresh bruises. But they still bore the marks of every sacrifice she had made. Ethan looked at them carefully. These hands are never broken, he said softly. They saved a life. Olivia's eyes filled with tears once more. Around them, the world seemed to pause. Noah smiled quietly beside them, and the afternoon sun bathed the three of them in golden light. And on that beautiful spring day, Ethan Park finally understood something that power and wealth had never taught him. The strongest people are often the ones who suffer in silence, apologize for their pain, and keep loving anyway. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.